All right, hello, welcome back. Good to see you guys. I see there's a few of us here already. So, hope you're having a nice week. And about 5 minutes from now, I guess, we will start our regular class meeting. But welcome back. Hello, Maya. How's it going? Everybody, feel free to say hello if you want in the chat. Hope you're having a good day. Hey, Megan. What's up, Justin? Told you, championship, Lakers. We did it. Hey, Jasmine. I'm good. I've been very busy this week with a lot of grading, so that's a factor. But other than that, it's not too bad. Still got some hot weather. Keep waiting for that to change a little bit. Hey everybody, hi Rose, Bianca, Gennaro. You guys are doing well. Hey Nelly. Peachy. Eddie. A lot of cats are running around. Hey Eduardo. Good to see you too. Hey there, Adriana. Just a few more minutes. Just kind of biding my time. 1 second, I'm going to get a soft drink. Watermelon. It's a pretty good flavor. Hey Ted, how's it going? Coconut is one of the best. That's facts for sure. That one's good. I think I tried almost all the flavors, but watermelon is one of my favorites for sure. Watermelon liqueur. I have a couple of bubblies in the fridge too. Those are like the one that's made by the Coca-Cola brand, but it's the same idea, like flavored sparkling water. Pretty good. Black cherry flavors. It's really aggressive flavoring. It almost tastes like a sugary drink. But anyway, hey Sebastian. Andy. Good to see all you people here. And just a few seconds, and I'll get us going. All right, guys. Well, it's essentially 4 o'clock, so I'm going to get us going. Thanks again for being here, and hope everyone is having a good week and a good semester to this point. Thanks for taking the midterm exam the other day. Now that that's behind us, we're moving into the second half of the semester. I'm grading those exams, and I'm working through them all weekend, so my goal is to finish them before the end of the weekend. And once I do have them done, then I'll send you guys a notice, and then you'll know that you can just contact me for your score, for any comments, or anything else involving the class. So yeah, that's where we're at. Midterm is now done, and we look forward to the next chapter of the book, which we're starting on today. So we went into chapter 8 to begin the class. That was just about basic concepts of logic, deduction, induction, validity, soundness. Then it was chapter 1, which is all about some of these famous social psychology experiments, the stages in cognitive development, the critical thinking process, qualities that good critical thinkers have, barriers to that. Then chapter 3 was all language and communication. What even is language? What are different functions of language? What are different types of definitions? What are some rhetorical devices that people use, and so on. And then the 4th chapter was knowledge. What is knowledge? Where are some resources that we can use to find it? What is this concept of evidence and justification? What are some good primary sources of evidence? What are some unreliable sources? What are some cognitive or perceptual errors that we can make? How to evaluate experts? How to, well, that was back in chapter 3, qualities of a good definition. But anyway, so we've, covered a lot of ground. And now we move into chapter 5, okay? So chapter 5 is all about another major topic in logic and critical thinking, which is all about fallacies. So we're going to now take a few meetings to look at different fallacies, and that's going to occupy our focus for the next couple of weeks, okay? So chapter 5, starting now, is our focus, and it's all about fallacies. And as always, I see you guys' comments here in the chat, so anybody at any time has questions, comments, or anything at all, let me know, and I'll definitely just take them in real time, and we'll go over them as they come. So fallacies, that's chapter 5. Sorry, I got a notebook here. All right, first question is, what even is a fallacy? It's a word that maybe you've heard used. It's something that I don't think is totally a foreign concept, but now we're in a logic class, and we've got to really drill down and get a clear understanding of it. So fallacies are basically defective arguments. They're arguments that have a flaw, that have some type of error in them. So fallacies are not good. Fallacies sometimes are used to make bad arguments for things that are not true. Sometimes a fallacious argument, as we call it when we use it as an adjective, a fallacious argument is an argument that might even seem persuasive at first glance without interrogating it or investigating it a little more closely. So fallacious arguments and fallacious reasoning are just bad things. When a bad argument that's fallacious is being given, it could convince you of something that you would not otherwise have been convinced of if not for the use of the fallacious argument. So we want to be the kind of people who don't get tricked by bad arguments, that don't get persuaded by defective reasoning. So we need to be able to distinguish good arguments from bad ones, and these fallacious arguments are in the bad category. By knowing what a fallacy is, by being able to recognize patterns of argument where fallacies happen, then you're going to be better able to avoid being tricked by them. You'll be able to point them out when other people commit fallacies, So instead of just nodding and saying, oh, wow, that's amazing, and I didn't know that, you'll pause for a moment and say, wait a minute, but there's a fallacy in that argument, and I have to call out that you committed that fallacy. So we don't want to allow fallacies to pass by, and we also, of course, on our own end, don't want to commit them when we make arguments to other people. Okay, so, and this is a very fundamental subject in any critical thinking class. So if you ever, anybody who takes critical thinking anywhere at any institution is going to learn a heavy dose of these fallacies. So this is something that would inevitably be a part of our class, but it's pretty interesting. So let me just start by giving you the definition of what a fallacy is in general, and then we're going to speak today about one particular category of the fallacies, okay? So fallacy. Okay, so a fallacy is when an argument has a logical error or flaw, and that causes the premises to not give proper support to the conclusion. So there we see what the definition of a fallacy is. It is when an argument does contain a logical error or a flaw, when it's got a defect in the argument logically, then it's got a fallacy. And these fallacies make it so that the argument doesn't have a conclusion that's properly supported by the premises that were given. So, these are bad arguments that we shouldn't rely on, even though for whatever reason, a lot of times people do make fallacious arguments. They make them in everyday life, in the media, in politics, in advertising and marketing. And here you are, just one human being, one citizen, who's trying to distinguish between true and false claims and come up with a reasonable worldview that's based on evidence. So we are now going to just start learning about different individual fallacies. There are 3 categories of fallacies in our book that we're studying, and we're going to take 3 meetings to go over each one. So today is the day where we're just going to talk about what are called fallacies of ambiguity. And there are 5 of those in our textbook. Then on Tuesday, we continue by going into the next batch, which are fallacies of relevance. And then Thursday next week, a week from today, we go over the last category in our book, which are fallacies of unwarranted assumption. So there's these 3 sets of fallacies. They all have this basic distinction in common, that they're all stating for us examples of kinds of arguments that are logically erroneous, defective, or flawed. Okay. Now, before I just launch into the breakdown of the 5 members of the ambiguity fallacy family today, I want to mention some stuff at the beginning of chapter 5, which is used in our textbook to get you thinking about the topic. That's something that our book has done, I think, throughout the semester. So when chapter 1 was being discussed, they opened up with the review of those famous social psychology experiments, Milgram and Zimbardo, to give you like a sort of relatable example of the human significance of being a good critical thinker or a bad critical thinker. In chapter 3, all about language and communication, they had that quick aside at the beginning of the chapter about the Benghazi scandal and the overrunning of the U.S. embassy in Libya there, to give you a sense of the importance of timely and effective communication when life and death is on the line. And then in chapter 4, they talked about famous cases of medical error, like a guy had the wrong leg cut off by the surgical team, and that was supposed to impress upon you the very significant importance of not making errors in perception or cognition that can lead to jumping to the wrong conclusions. So now here in chapter 5, they have a couple of little anecdotes also. Well, one really, for the most part. So here it is. This is a real fact, real story. There was a woman named Shannon Townsend, okay? And what happened with her is she was a very good high school student. And she was like an honors high school student, so she got admitted to the University of Colorado. She got in. And then in her first semester of college, she was doing really well. She had like a 3.9 GPA, so she's having academic success. She's, finding her way in the world now, an adult. So things look great, right? But then something happened. At the end of her freshman year, basically, she started to get involved in this this cult organization called the Brethren, which was organized and run by this charismatic leader named Jim Roberts. And ever since she joined with the Brethren cult, she'd never been seen again, so she cut off all ties with her family and friends. And you might hear that and think, well, that's a pretty extreme example. That's not something that happens too much. And I mean, it's not like it happens all the time or to millions and millions of people, but it's a fact that this is not an isolated case. Like hundreds and even thousands of young people, oftentimes around your guys' age, new adults, do similar things each year, being recruited into dangerous mind control type of cult organizations that are based around excessive and total devotion to like a single person or a single set of ideas. And now, how do these cults work? How is it that they possibly can recruit people to their ranks? Well, they use manipulative and deceptive tactics, and one of those tactics is the use of fallacious arguments and fallacious reasoning. So, they present what seem to be, to an unskilled, judge of arguments, plausible, reasonable sounding statements and reasons and arguments, and that can then be a powerful recruiting tool for cults and so on. So why is it that young people and young adults are sometimes the most easy prey of these cults and these cult leaders? Well, it's because, as you guys probably can understand from just your own situation, when you're at that age, you've lived a lot of your life, almost all of it, within the care of your parents as a child. Now you've got all this newfound independence just kind of thrown at you. And, sometimes people struggle a little bit with all of that newfound independence. Like, you want to form an identity, you want to be a part of something, you want to know who you are in the world and kind of start making those strides. And that is a time where a lot of people have vulnerability to cults, because they know that, if you want to depend on other people and be a part of something, and if you are not the most assertive, or if you can't tolerate ambiguity and gray area, then that's where they get their foot in the door, and they can sometimes, work their will to get people to do their bidding. And so they mentioned some quote from a famous clinical counselor and a specialist on cults. The guy's name is Ron Burks. And his quote is really probably something that I'm sure at this point in our semester doesn't exactly surprise you. It's just, what do you think is the antidote? What is the thing that is makes you kind of immune to the efforts of the cult recruiters? What makes you the sort of person that's hard to be recruited? Well, critical thinking seems to be the solution, and that's what Ron Burke says here on. So page 136, I'm just reading a little from the book. It says, college students, especially freshmen, that are having difficulty adjusting to that environment and are experiencing separation from families, or who are having academic or social problems, are especially vulnerable to cults. Lack of assertiveness, dependence on others, low tolerance for ambiguity, wanting simple right and wrong answers for complex questions, and poor critical thinking skills all make students more likely to succumb to pressure from campus recruitment and cults. The best way to avoid being targeted by a cult, according to clinical counselor, cult expert Ron Burks, is to be well-informed and unafraid to ask questions. And now this is a quote from him. The antidote is critical thinking. Cults don't like people that are constantly thinking and asking tough questions. So the cult wants you to be the sort of person who just nods along and says, wow, that's interesting information. Instead, you should be the kind of person who says, but are you sure? How do you know that? What's the proof? What evidence do you have? I need a solid argument. I can't just be told something. I need to verify it with facts and evidence that are independently ascertained. So that's just one little window into the larger general significance and importance of knowing about fallacies, knowing when a bad argument is coming at you so that you can identify it, not be swayed by it, and also, on your behalf, to be the kind of person who doesn't make those sorts of arguments to people in mind. Okay, so we learned what a fallacy is, give you that little anecdote. Now I'm going to erase the board and we'll start talking about today's category of fallacies, which are called fallacies of ambiguity. Okay. Fallacies of ambiguity. So what are they in general? They are these fallacies that contain ambiguous words, sloppy grammar, or a confusion between two similar concepts. Okay. ambiguous word, sloppy grammar, or a confusion between two similar concepts. Okay, so that's what a fallacy of ambiguity is. It's an argument that has this type of logical flaw or error. So they're all about ambiguity. Something in the argument's ambiguous, and without that clarity, we're really not sure what to conclude or whether the conclusion is supported in the right way by the evidence stated in the premises. So there's 5 members of the fallacy of ambiguity family, I guess, if you like. And so they all are a part of this category because they're all containing some ambiguous words or grammar or confusion between related concepts. But there are 5 members, and they each have their own distinctive features. So just like, you're a member of a family, and you guys maybe all have the same last name, or, at least you have like a similar genetic identity. You're unique individuals. And so we're learning about a category of fallacies today. That's fallacies of ambiguity, and there are 5 members of it. So I'm going to list for you what the 5 fallacies of ambiguity are, and then we'll go through each one by one, talk about some examples of it, and give you definitions. And that's the plan for just for today anyway. Okay, so we see the definition there. Now I'm going to list off the 5 items here. Okay, so within the set of ambiguity fallacies, there are these 5. There's equivocation. Okay, then there's amphibole. The third one is the fallacy of accent. Then you have the fallacy of division and the fallacy of composition. Okay, so 5 concepts to learn, and that's our goal today. So we're going to start with this one here at the top. I wanted to just list the 5 of them first so that you kind of have a mental touchstone to draw on when I go back into each one, but we are going to do them one at a time. So now I'm going to erase the bottom 4, and we'll just start off by the discussion of equivocation fallacy. Okay, so the first fallacy of ambiguity in our set here is equivocation. And equivocation is a fallacy that occurs when there's a key term in an argument that appears more than once, but the meaning of the word or term changes throughout the course of the argument. And that's the problem with this type of fallacy. So when a key term in an argument is used more than once and with different meanings, and that's the real problem. Okay, key term appears more than once, and meaning of it basically switches up like midway through the argument. So let me give you an example, and we'll start off with like a kind of easy, trivial example, I guess, and then maybe we can talk about some other interesting variations on that. So, okay, let me write a little argument right here. Now, this argument will contain 2 premises that lead to the conclusion underneath the horizontal line. So let's say the first premise is that Joe is at a bank. Okay. Now, premise 2. Let's just continue by stating that a bank is a financial institution. All right, Joe's at a bank, and a bank is a financial institution. Therefore, okay, deduction, everybody. Like, this is a pretty, I think, elementary argument to deduce the conclusion. What do you say follows from those statements? What would be the valid, apparently, conclusion to state there below? Joe's at a bank, and a bank is a financial institution. So, therefore, thus, hence, what's the conclusion? What conclusion can be drawn? It's nothing too crazy. It's just straightforward from those two premises. So what would it be? Let me know in the chat. I'm asking you. Okay, yeah, so that Joe's at a financial institution. Correct. All right, so I'll put that here. Therefore, Joe is at a financial institution. Okay. All right, there you go. Joe's at a financial institution. Seems like a pretty clear conclusion. Now, I want to draw some notes above, so I'm going to erase the definition, which already we've seen. All right, so how could this one be a fallacy of equivocation? Well, all right, so let's think about words again for a minute. When it comes to words in our language, and really just every language, there's always a multiplicity of meanings, a plurality of meanings with even just one single term. You know, so like we've learned a little bit about that when we talk about language in chapter 3. Like the word square, it could refer to the geometrical figure. It could be like, you know, a square where people gather, like the town square. It could be like, yeah, let's square up and fight, you know, like, so there's a lot of different non-identical meanings to the same word with the same spelling, with the same sound, square. And you'll see that on and on and on, right? Let me think of other cases. Light, you know, it could refer to like light that comes out of the sun or a light bulb, or it could refer to like how heavy something is. It's light, it's not that heavy. It could be a noun that is used to refer to like a light that you're installing. I'm putting in a light. So as you guys know, if you ever look up a word in a standard reference like a dictionary, you know, you'll see a primary meaning, a secondary meaning, a tertiary meaning. As it goes down, it becomes the less common usage, but all of those are like interchangeable or like at least legitimate ways of thinking of the meaning of the word. So in this argument, there's a key term that's used more than once. And let's imagine what could be multiple meanings of that word. Which word do you think I'm calling out here for discussion in this argument that's on this board? Maybe the word used in the argument changes its meaning halfway through. And what could that word be in the case of this argument that I'm using for demonstration purposes? What do you think I'm pointing us to? Yeah, good, Taya, bank. Okay, so let me talk about bank, the one word bank. The bank occurs here and also there. So with the word bank, I'm just going to sort of put like bank definition 1, bank definition 2. So what is one meaning of the word bank? Well, clearly, probably the most common way of thinking about what it means is a place that is a financial institution, like, you know, that you deposit your money or you request a loan or you withdraw money. So there's the financial institution sense of the word. So in that sense, you know, like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, so forth and so on, that's a bank. But what's a different meaning of the word bank that doesn't have to do with the financial institution? So like a secondary possible meaning of the same word. Okay, that's good, like a river bank. Yeah, there's also the blood bank. There's food bank, sperm bank. You know, there's the bank shot in basketball. But let's go with the edge of a river. That'll work. Okay, so edge of river. So suppose that in premise 1, where we say that Joe's at a bank, what was intended was that he's out fishing or something on the Mississippi River banks, okay? hanging out the side of the river, you know. And then, in the second premise, clearly this stated term refers to the other meaning of bank, financial institution. But if this is used in the sense of riverbank, and this is used in the sense of money bank, then does the conclusion follow? Does it follow from those two statements then that he is at a financial institution or not? That's the question now. If we have equivocated, as they say, on the word bank, then no, the conclusion doesn't follow, because we have, again, modified the meaning of the one word halfway through the argument. And that's why the conclusion does not follow from the premises. Now, you wouldn't necessarily see that, though, on just a casual glance. You might have to inspect or examine a little more closely what was meant by the individual statements in the premises. So that's how equivocation works. A word is used multiple times, but a different meaning of the word is employed somewhere in the middle of the conversation or of the argument. And that leads to a conclusion that's incorrect. Now, I gave you this example to just get us started so that you could see like a simple, trivial kind of case where this could be seen. But there's like more, I think, important situations where this fallacy happens that we want to know about in life. Like, so if you sign a contract sometimes, you agree to certain terms, and later on, they might say, oh, well, you violated the terms of the contract because the words meant things that you didn't understand that they meant when you signed them, right? So like at the expiration of this lease, you must forfeit your security deposit. And, maybe there was a different meaning of the term expiration of lease that you thought applied to the facts of the case. But then they draw attention later to some fine print and say, no, expiration of lease could in fact mean 1, 2, 3, and 4 different possibilities. And therefore, you feel like you've been ripped off or something, but it might have been because you weren't attentive enough in the beginning to the equivocal nature of the language that was used in the signing of the contract. Another possible case I can think of is, so like sometimes I teach a class at Cal State Fullerton in the philosophy of sex and love. And one topic that we go over in the class, which is in our book that we use, is about the morality and of sexual consent, which is obviously a huge topic now in the light of the Me Too movement and all this growing awareness around survivor stories and all of that having to do with abuse. So what causes an act of consent to legitimately make a sexual interaction with somebody permissible? Well, there's a sort of argument that's a fallacy of equivocation that sometimes is implicated in this whole kind of thorny topic as well. So let me put that on the board. Okay, so consider this type of argument. Someone says, if she consents to sex, then it's permissible to proceed, okay? Okay, and then imagine that the second premise from there states that by not physically resisting, she gave consent. So, it's a fallacious argument. We're going to get to that. But before we do that, what do you think would be the supposed conclusion of this argument just on the surface? If she consents, then it's okay to do it. And by not physically resisting me, she did give consent. And so therefore, I guess, at least as stated, the conclusion should be what statement or sentence? Straightforward enough, but let me see what you think. If she consents, then it's okay. And by not physically resisting and fighting back, she did consent. So what would follow? Oh yeah, just let me know. You got the Therefore, it is okay to have sex with her. Right. Therefore, it was okay that we had sex. Now, in this argument, though, what is a word that's a key word in the whole argument that could be seen as having its meaning switched up somewhere in the middle? Maybe you can determine what I'm indicating here. One word in this argument that might have to be analyzed a little more: consent. Okay, good. So consent. Consent is a word that occurs in the two premises, premise 1 and premise 2, but it seems like it doesn't exactly mean the same thing in the two premises, all right? So let's look at that. So in the first premise, where it says that if she consents, then it's okay. What kind of consent do you think that would have to be? What kind of consent, actually legitimately does make it okay for people to engage in sex? What type of consent do you think that would have to be overall? Verbal, yeah, something affirmative, right? Something that is an explicit indicator to the other person that you wish to go forward with the act, right? So affirmative or explicit consent. Okay, so that would make it okay, assuming all else is equal, that these are adults and so forth, of course, right? So that's what premise 1 means, that if she consents by giving an explicit verbal token of consent that's clear and unambiguous, then it's okay. But in the second premise, it says, well, she didn't fight, she didn't fight back. I don't have bruises or marks. It's not like she tried to attack me or push me away. So that was consent. But in this sense, what is consent? It's not this strong notion of consent. It's a weakened notion. It's like failure to fight, failure to run away or something, right? So but those two things aren't the same. Saying I want to do something is not the same thing as just not fighting a person who's forcing themselves upon you. And of course, there's all kinds of reasons why maybe a woman rationally would not want to incite more hostility and violence from the perpetrator. So, there have been, and of course, it's not impossible for there to be cases where a woman is so petrified with fear that she's not physically resisting, but that can't be interpreted as an act of affirmative consent. So this is explicit, and this is something like failure to resist. That does not mean that the conclusion follows from the premises, because when you make an argument that does not commit this fallacy, you have to use all key terms in a consistent way, as they say, univocally throughout. But we've equivocated on the meaning of this word halfway through the middle. So, and this is something with much bigger stakes, right? That's why, I kind of wanted to point out other additional examples, not just the first one that I used. So that is a possible fallacious argument involving the all-important topic of consent. Let me look at some other examples from the book and just try to see what they add to that discussion we just had. So, okay, so they refer to this little piece of media analysis from 2010, of 10 years ago. So back then, Democratic Senator Harry Reid, he was the majority leader of the Senate at the time, and he had this statement, which was just something he said in an interview, that, okay, here's the quote: "If you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife." And from this, Fox News took that quote and created a segment where they basically they tried to take down Harry Reid, and they're like, this guy's horrible, this guy is morally, backwards, because he says that it's okay for men that are out of work to beat their wife up. How could he possibly say that's okay, that's something that's not wrong? But let's think about now the fallacy of equivocation. Go back to his quote. He said, "If you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife." Fox News panelists said, "This is a horrible statement. He's telling us that it's okay for guys that are out of work and down on their luck to beat up their wife." Now, what word do you think it might be whose meaning is being interpreted differently on the two sides here, between the original statement and then the criticism of it later? It has to do with the word may. That's exactly right, Taya. Good. So what are two different meanings of the word may? I think we've probably learned this so far. One way of thinking of the meaning of the word may is that it means what? May could mean, for example, what concept? Okay, so good. You've thrown them both out there. May could mean just possibility. That's one meaning of it. So like tomorrow it may rain. That doesn't mean I'm saying I'm giving it permission to rain tomorrow. It's just saying that there's a chance that that could happen. That's possible, right? But another meaning of the word may is as in permission. Like someone says, Professor, may I go sharpen my pencil or something? You know, they want to get up off their desk and they ask for permission. The professor says, sure, you may do that. Now, may as a statement of permission is different than saying something's possible. Sometimes this is done for humorous effect, you know, like the word can is sort of like that too. Little kid says, can I go to the bathroom? And like the wise guy is like, haha, can you? I don't know. You tell me. Like as if their question is, am I physically able to do it rather than am I allowed to do it? Okay, so when Harry Reid said that if you're a man, you're out of work, you may beat up your wife, the charitable interpretation is that he's not telling people you have free reign to beat your wife if you're out of work, but rather that that's statistically likelier just as a matter of incidence of that type of crime. Like it seems to have a greater correlation with lower income. So like households that are making less money have a higher overall statistical incidence of domestic violence, but that doesn't mean the person's celebrating it or praising it or saying that it's okay. So that could be another case, this time through a little of an informal example based on like a exchange of dialogue versus criticism later. Now, let's see if there's others from the book. This is another kind of funny one. Carl and Juan. So they're talking about physician-assisted suicide, and they're having a little debate. They don't agree on it. Carl says this to his friend Juan. He says, hey, Juan, I'm telling you, terminally ill patients have a right to decide how and when they want to die. They have a right to decide how and when they want to die. Juan comes back and says, that's not true, Carl. There's no right to that in the law. Okay, now it seems like these two guys are having a legitimate disagreement over some question of whether there's, you know, the topic of physician-assisted suicide, but they're using a certain word in a different way between the two of them. Now, what word do you think it is in that example? So Carl says, terminally ill patients have a right to decide how and when they want to die. Juan says, that's not true. There's no right to that in the law. Okay, good, Bianco. The word right. Now, what could be these two possible non-equivalent meanings of the word right? You could talk about it in the sense of what versus what. Like when Carl says people have a right to decide when they want to die. How is that to be interpreted in terms of the meaning of right? And what's the difference between that and Juan's statement where he says there's no right to that in the law? What do you think we're getting at here? So we're almost there. We've said that right is the key term, which is being equivocated on. But what could it be? So right can be like correct. Okay, I could work with that. Let's see if others. Individual right. Okay, Angela. That's all. That's also decent. Yes. Who else has something for me here? Okay, so they can have the right in freedom versus right in the law. That's very good, Jasmine. That's very precise. Okay, good. So sometimes when people speak about rights, they speak about what we should be allowed to do because we have these natural, like God-given rights. You know, like someone could say, remember in 2015, the United States Supreme Court decided that gay marriage is protected by the U.S. Constitution, and so it's going to be legalized. But before that, people could have said, we have the right to get married. You know, we have that right because we're just human beings, love each other, right? They could have said that. And then there could have been people who say, oh, no, there's no right to that in our law. So there's a difference between the statement of like a moral right, like naturally you ought to have this freedom, versus legal rights, which is just like what has already been established in the body of law that's been codified. So they're talking about the word right in different senses. Carl is speaking of it in the righteous kind of idealistic sense, like this is something that people should be afforded the liberty to do. And Juan is instead talking about it just in the legal sense. Well, there's no established right to that so far. Okay, so another case of equivocation. And then they also mention, I guess, after that, that sometimes we equivocate when we use the same word in different ways, like relative terms. If I say, John is not tall, but his daughter, his 3-year-old daughter, is tall. Does that mean that the daughter's taller than him? No. Because although we use the same word 2 times, and we say that he's not tall and that she is, when we say that he's not tall, we mean not tall for like an average adult male, right? So that's one sense of the word tall. When we say she is tall, we mean that she's tall for your average 3-year-old girl. So obviously what's tall for a little girl can still be shorter than what's not tall for an adult man. Okay, so we got to just basically make sure that we apply terms consistently and that we are attentive to which significant meaning of the term that we're employing when we make arguments, written statements, and just everyday speech. Okay, so that's one of these fallacies of ambiguity, equivocation. All right, so now I'm going to move on to the next one of 5 that we do have. Cool, yeah. The next one is called Amphibole. Okay, now the name it's not going to be something that probably is so memorable because you already have the word like amphibian and stuff in your mind. So but it's nothing to do with that. Okay, amphibole has to do with grammatical ambiguity. Okay, so this is the fallacy that happens when there's a grammatical ambiguity in an argument, which allows for more than one conclusion to be drawn. Okay. Okay, there you go. So there is a grammatical ambiguity in the argument, and that makes it unclear, ambiguous. What conclusion are we really supposed to draw? So now there's one example from the book. I'll start off with that. So a little backstory so that you understand the example. Back in the early 2000s, there was this event where there was a woman in Florida named Terri Schiavo, and basically she had suffered a traumatic head injury, and that caused her to be placed in a coma. And you know, at that point, the doctors were telling her family and her husband and stuff that there's no hope for her to be revived, that her brain activity was basically nothing, and that they were really only keeping her alive through the use of the extraordinary life support machines, but that she had no possible chance of returning to full health to regain consciousness. So like she was basically just being life supported, but with no prospects for any way of recovering her consciousness or thought. So then, you know, that poses a dilemma to the family, like shall they remove her from life support or not? And what would have been her wishes, because she gave no advance directive on this. So there ended up being a bit of a dispute and a disagreement between different members of her close loved ones. And here's a statement that you could have read at the time, and it's grammatically ambiguous. So let's see if you can spot the ambiguity. So Terri Schiavo's mother and her husband are on opposite sides of the battle over her life. Okay, you heard that? Terri Schiavo's mother and her husband are on opposite sides of the battle over her life. So Schiavo's mother and her husband don't agree about whether she should, you know, stay on life support or not. But that's ambiguous because we're not sure which word refers to. Like, which word in that sentence is of grammatically ambiguous reference, where it says Schiavo's mother and her husband are on opposite sides of the battle over her life. Whose husband? Exactly, Jasmine, because the pronoun her is all we know. But there are multiple female subjects that it could refer to. So when it says her husband, does that mean that it is Terri Schiavo's husband that is fighting with Schiavo's mother? Or does it mean that Schiavo's mother is fighting with Schiavo's husband, Schiavo's mother's husband, rather, who is the father of Schiavo, right? It can't be determined unless we disambiguate the reference of the pronoun her. And so let me read. It says, in this statement, regarding the issue of whether to remove the feeding tube from brain-damaged Terri Schiavo, the ambiguous wording makes it unclear which conclusion follows. Is it Terri Schiavo's husband or her father That is her mother's husband who is taking the opposite side. In this case, Terry Schiavo's husband wanted to have the feeding tube removed. The mother and father, believing that she still had a chance to regain consciousness, insisted that the feeding tube be kept in place. So, yeah. And there's like an epilogue to that story, too, actually. The former governor of Florida, Jeb Bush, sided with the parents and ordered that she not be removed from life support, even though that was in violation of the husband's wishes and there was no advance directive. So it was kind of like an interesting story and was reported in the media. But that's just an example to think about Amphibole here. Let me give you some other examples. So Bill and Ted were hanging out, and they were having a discussion about his car. Now, how's that ambiguous? You heard what I said. Bill and Ted chilling and just talking about his car. That's Amphibole. Because whose car, right? There's Bill, there's Ted, there's two male subjects that are named, but then the pronoun his, it's indeterminate whether it refers to the first named male subject or the second. So that would be another case where if you just heard that statement, you really couldn't interpret what to believe or what is being stated or what is being claimed. You'd have to ask for further clarification, like who did you mean by the word his? Okay, here we go. The photographers took detailed photos of the malnourished natives, but they were underdeveloped. What do you think? What's ambiguous there? The journalists took detailed photos of the they, right? Because they is a plural pronoun, and it could be that they refers to the photos that were underdeveloped, because like you have to develop photos in a dark room. Or it could refer to the natives because they were referred to as malnourished. So you're not sure if it means that their bodies are not fully developed. So, you know, that's another case where grammatical ambiguity leaves us with no clear answer of what was really being claimed in the statement. Also from the book, okay, sometimes it's done in humor. So there's a piece of dialogue from an old comedy film called Spy Hard, and this is how the dialogue goes. The agent says to the director, "Sir, we've intercepted a very disturbing satellite transmission from our listening post on the Rock of Gibraltar." The director says, "What is it?" Agent says, "Oh, well, sir, it's this very big rock that sticks out of the water off the south coast of Spain." Now, that's done for humorous effect, because when the director asks, "What is it?" We're not sure whether he's asking about the content of the satellite transmission, or he's asking what the Rock of Gibraltar is, which is where the transmission was intercepted. Now, obviously, the most natural interpretation of his question would have been, what was the message itself that you intercepted? But for the sake of humor, we play on the ambiguity there, and the agent gives a response directed at the other possible referent of the phrase it. Okay, wear it and be happy. That's a slogan from Clinique when they created a new fragrance called Happy, and that was part of their marketing slogans and materials. Wear it and be happy. So like it's called Happy. But in a way, we are not sure what the grammatical function of the word and is there. Is that a conjunction term, or is that a conditional term? Does it mean that here are just two facts? You're going to wear it. Also, separate from that, you'll be happy. Or is it saying that by wearing it, you will become happy? So if you wear it, then you're happy, like a conditional. It's ambiguous. Now, if a person buys a product and then they become depressed and they say, "What happened? I thought you said wear it and be happy." They could say, "Well, you know, it's ambiguous, right? We didn't necessarily say that it would make you happy. We just kind of hinted at that, but we left it ambiguous so that you'd be left to your own interpretation." So yeah, with Amphibole, the main thing is just use language and grammar properly and ask for a person to clarify or rephrase their statement if you don't know exactly what they meant. A lot of times, you know, any case where there's an amphibole, it could easily be cleared up if you just ask a follow-up question like, "Excuse me, sorry, I didn't quite catch. What did you mean by the word? Because I'm not sure what the reference was." Okay, so we got those two then. That's amphibole. Now we're moving to the third, and there's 5 of these for today, so here comes number 3. That's the fallacy of accent. Okay, so the fallacy of accent. This is a fallacy that happens when the meaning of an argument or statement changes based on which word or phrase in it is emphasized. Okay, so fallacy of accent. And so again, I'm going to elaborate on this a little. One really kind of interesting thing about language, right? And we do this all the time, sometimes without thinking, but one pretty cool feature of language is that we can highlight different words in a single statement by placing a sort of stress on those words or an inflection on those words. And that can actually transform the meaning that is interpreted by what the statement says, just by means of what we call accenting on some of the words in there. In written speech, it's like you can sometimes do this by all caps or by like bolding it or underlining it, italicizing it. But it's common in speech. So like take this for example. If I just say in a straight monotone with no variation, why did you steal my bike from me? Like there's a message that's conveyed there. There's information that you're going to get. But if I start to emphasize particular words in that sentence, I can bring out different focal points as to what I want you to take away from my words. So like say I say it this way. Why did you steal my bike from me? Now I place the emphasis on what word? Bike. And by doing that, it kind of carries this significance that of all the things that you could have taken from me, my bike, really? I mean, I loved my bike so much, so why'd you take my bike, of all things? What if I say, why did you steal my bike from me? Now I'm accenting the word me, like I know you're a bike thief, but come on, me, I thought we were cool. Like, how could you have stolen a bike from me, of all people? Why did you steal my bike from me? Now I'm accenting the word steal, like you could have just borrowed it, or you could have just asked and I might have given it to you. Why did you steal my bike from me? So you see, it's the same exact sentence in a way, it's the same order of words, but we're dancing around with the accent and causing it to have slightly different or even somewhat significantly different meanings. But the problem is that sometimes by means of accenting a passage of writing or speech, we transform the meaning in a way that's illegitimate and misinterpret the intention of the actual statement. So there's an example of the book to show this idea. And it's a piece of dialogue between, imagine this, like a mother and a daughter. So the mother comes home and let's say they have like a shed like out in the yard where they hold garden tools and stuff, and it's burned down. It's totally burned to the ground, sitting there smoldering, and the mother comes up and she sees the daughter nearby and she's like, oh no, I know she did this. So she's mad at the daughter. She's like, come on, why did you do that? I can't believe you really burned down the shed. I thought I told you so many times, don't play with matches. Don't play with matches. I told you that. And then the daughter comes back and says, I know that. I know you said those words. The thing is, I wasn't playing with matches. I mean, I'm conducting a science experiment. How's this a game to you? This is like a serious thing. I mean, am I joking? Am I laughing? There's no play. So you said don't play with the matches. And I'm not. I just lit the matches for the sake of scientific inquiry. Now look, that obviously shows that there was a misunderstanding on the behalf of the young child, right? Because what word's being accented here that's flipping around and distorting the meaning of the original message? When she places a stress and accent on the word what? Play, exactly. So it's like daughter's interpretation is, she said don't play with matches. So as long as I'm not creating a game, I can still light the matches. It just can't be playing. But that's obviously not what was meant, right? Obviously what was meant is that when people tell you don't play with matches, like your parents, they don't mean as long as it's not a game, you can do whatever you want with them. They mean don't touch the matches, don't light matches, just don't interact with them and don't light fires. So that would be a fallacy of accent as one case. Another one from the book. So say a school bulletin is issued and it says, school's cracking down on campus, sorry, the school is cracking down on off-campus drinking. So someone's reading that, they're a student, they're like, oh, that's cool, I'm glad that they're focusing on off-campus drinking, so that means they don't care at all when I bring a flask to class and I'm just drinking on campus. That's obviously not what the message was intended to convey. It's saying that, you know, there's a problem with off-campus drinking, but that's not to grant permission or authorization for people to drink on campus. So by placing stress on the word off, the person's trying to kind of give himself a wider latitude of freedom that's not been implied by the message. Now, sometimes though, more significant stuff is even at stake than that. Well, I'll hold that for one second. I want to give you one more of these just kind of silly examples. Okay, so let's go back to like parents and kids. Parents see their kid hanging out with somebody that they just don't think is a good influence on, you know, their young child. So they say to the child, hey, I don't want that person and you to be friends. You're not allowed to hang out with them. And here's the thing, like, don't let that person walk through this door of our house one more time. You understand me? I don't want them coming through this front door again. All right, so a week later, mom comes home, and this kid is hanging out with their kid, like, on the couch. Now, what do you think is my example getting at here? What's going to be the child's response when the parent says, why is this person here? I thought I told you that's not allowed. Child's going to come back with what little, you know, response? You said, I listened to you. I heard what you said. You said, don't let this person ever come through the front door. So, I mean, I let him in through the window. You see the open window over there? I didn't let him in the front door. That's your rule. I followed your rule. Now, obviously, that's not what was intended by the parent when they say, don't let that person through the door. That's just a sort of informal way of saying, I don't want them in the house. You can't hang out with them. They're not allowed to be on this premises. So, once again, a case of accent changing the meaning of the message. Taya, does this have anything to do with learning other languages and where to place emphasis or words on words during pronunciation? Well, I mean, certainly, you know, you want to know what words you are emphasizing when you speak because it carries a different meaning to the hearer depending on the context. But it's not just for other languages. I mean, it's for your own language too. Of course, if you're learning another language, that adds a whole other layer of complication to it because there might be certain expected conventions of speech in that language that that you're not so familiar with and not so experienced with. So like a way of talking might sound too monotone. It might sound like it emphasizes the wrong part of the statement. And that's just part of the difficulty of learning language. But before we even talk about learning the other ones, got enough trouble with our own, you know, just trying to make sure that we're doing things right and arguing in the proper way. So, but no, it's a reasonable insight that you're mentioning on that. Okay, now last point on the accent fallacy. They mentioned this in the book, and I thought it was kind of an important example too. Sometimes this accent fallacy stuff can be used to try and trick you into believing things that are not credible or that are not really worthy of your belief. And so they can be used as a tactic of manipulation too. One thing that they mentioned is that in this case of that cult that I started today's lecture with, The Brethren by Jim Roberts, you know, he's the leader of that cult, they'll use what's called proof texting, which is a tactic that cults use to try and influence you to join them by leaning heavily on your already existing religious beliefs. So that could be like a kind of leverage that they use to get a foot in the door to bring about wider acceptance to their set of ideas. And what proof texting is when you cite out of context certain passages of biblical scripture and then claim that that passage is somehow signifying the truth of a message that you are giving today. So like, you know, say that the cult of the Brethren is trying to convince some person to join. It's like, look, I know you maybe don't trust that we're the right group, but you're a Christian, right? So if you're a Christian, I know that you know the Bible. So it says right there in the Bible, Luke 14:33, I'll read it. It says, so likewise, whosoever of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. You see it? It says it right there. If you don't give up all that you have, then you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. And so that's telling you to follow us, right? That's what that means. That's saying leave your family and friends, abandon all your connections, and just dive headfirst into this group. That's what the Bible says. I mean, you say you're a Christian, right? So you should come with us. But look, the accent was placed on forsaketh not all that he hath, and then that becomes the subject matter of a more broad interpretation that the person's using to try and influence you. Or they could refer to other scripture passages. They could say, you know, doesn't it say right there, be thy brother's keeper? We're the brethren. I mean, who do you think they're talking about? Brother's keeper? Can't be a coincidence, right? Just now by placing an accent and an emphasis on the word brother's keeper, it has the ability to maybe have a greater impact on the person that's not so skilled in the ways of fallacious argument. So a couple more examples of the accent fallacy. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. Yes, there's many translations of the scriptures, including that. I was just quickly referring to the somewhat simplified version that we see here. Yeah, the New Testament Bible. Okay, so we move to the next. All right, so there's two more that are left, and they're kind of like a pair because they are quite similar. It's just towards kind of opposite directions. Okay, so there's composition and division. I'll start off with division. Okay, so the fallacy of division, get my notes real fast. Okay, so this is a fallacy that happens when you incorrectly assume that every member of a group or collection must have the same characteristics that the group has in general. Okay, so when one incorrectly assumes, or actually, I don't want to write the word assume, infers. When one incorrectly infers that each individual member of a group has a characteristic that the whole group has. Okay, so it's when one incorrectly infers that every individual member of a group has some characteristic that the whole group has at large. The fallacy of division can also be stated by means of a form. So I'm going to write the form of the fallacy division here. So the form of the division fallacy has two premises, and then they lead to the conclusion. The first premise would be the statement that some group, and we'll just label it G because it could be many different possibilities. Group G has characteristic C. Okay, group G has characteristic C. Second premise, X, some individual, and we're labeling them X because there's infinitely many possible situations where this could be implicated, but let's say X is a member of group G. Okay, so what do you think might be our conclusion based on those premises? Group G has characteristic C. X is one member of the group G. So therefore, the division fallacy will conclude that the individual X has characteristic C, yes. Now the problem with this is that that's just not always true. You cannot actually infer from the presence of a feature that a whole group or system has that each member of the group has it too. Okay, and I'll just give you as many examples as I can think of. So we're the United States, that's our country, and the United States considered as a whole is the wealthiest nation in the world. That's just a fact. So the United States is the richest country in the world. You are a citizen of the United States, so you're one member of that group. So therefore, you are the richest person in the world. Does that follow? It doesn't, right? That's a situation where the whole has a quality that is not seen in every member of the whole. Okay, so you can have a very wealthy nation, but not necessarily that every single citizen of that nation is fantastically wealthy, right? So that's where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, at least in that situation. Let's see. The Lakers are the best team in basketball, which I guess, they just won the championship, so that's probably somewhat reasonable to say that. So the Lakers are the group, best team in basketball is the characteristic. Danny Green or Al Caruso is a member of the Lakers, so he is the best player in basketball. Does that follow? No. You can have a team that, as a collective, is the best, but that does not mean that every member of said team is the best player, per se, all right? I'll give you other examples to continue on that theme. You're looking right now at me, which obviously means that I'm visible to the naked eye. You don't have to bring out a microscope just to see me. You're just looking at me, and you can see me with your regular vision. So I'm something that's visible to the naked eye, but I'm made up of tiny little cells. So take a cell swabbed from the side of my cheek. Since it's a part of me, it's one of the parts of my body, and my body is visible to the naked eye, so the cells are visible to the naked eye as well. Does that follow? Of course not. Okay, so the whole body is formed of many individual parts, but the individual parts are so infinitesimally small that you can't see them without proper magnification. So it's not always true that a feature seen within a group is there in each member. This one's in the book, so I'll use that also. Men are taller than women, just on average. Just so if you think of men as like a category overall, men are taller than women. Who's a short man? I mean, they used the case of Danny DeVito. You guys know who he is? Maybe you've seen the sitcom It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia or whatever. Danny DeVito, Hollywood actor. He's like 4'11". So the argument: men are taller than women. Danny DeVito is one of the men, so therefore Danny DeVito is taller than the average woman. But that just doesn't follow, obviously. Okay, I could have used Kevin Hart or somebody else that's short, but I think you understand the example. And then sometimes, all right, stereotyping can be seen in cases of the fallacy of division. So suppose that there's some shared general characteristic that people associate with a particular category of people. I don't want to spread around negative stereotypes, but let's say like a positive one. Canadians, they say Canadians are nice, and the book mentions that, so I think that's safe. And I've been to Canada a few times, and probably some plausible truth to that. They seem very helpful to strangers and everything. So anyway, say that Canadians are nice. Derek is from Ottawa, Canada. Therefore, Derek is nice. But that's not necessarily true. Even if a culture as a whole has a feature that's somewhat associated with it, we cannot draw down a conclusion that every single member of the group without further evidence is someone that has the same quality. Okay, so the hotel is big. Room 101 is one of the rooms of the hotel. Does it mean that the room 101 is big? No, you can have a big hotel with a lot of small rooms. So on, and those are all just different cases of the division fallacy. Now one more, okay? So the last one then, while we'll close the meeting on this, is the composition fallacy. Oh, let me write it the right way. Fallacy of composition. Okay. Oh, Big Ed from 90 Days Fiance. You know what? I actually started watching that, but it's been a while. I got to get back into the show, but I'll get back to you on that later. For now, I just want to throw this out there with a few minutes that we have left. So, fallacy of composition. If you understood the division fallacy just now, then this is going to be easy because it's like the same thing, just the opposite direction. So, this fallacy happens when you make an incorrect inference from that the whole group has to have a feature that is just seen in individual members of the group. So, a whole group based on characteristic of individual members of the group. Okay, so division, we start with the whole, and then we reach a conclusion about the parts. That's why we call it divide. You know, start with a big group, divide down to a conclusion about one member. Composition is just the opposite. We start with a claim about individuals that are members of the group, and we draw a broad inference to the whole. So this moves in the direction from parts to whole, and division goes from whole to part. But it's the same type of general error in logic and in reasoning. So the structure of the composition fallacy, now that we've got it on the board, I'm going to erase. The structure of the composition fallacy looks just like this. It's like the contrapositive of the division fallacy. So it says X is a member of group G. X has characteristic C. So therefore, group G has characteristic C. And that's just not necessarily true in every case. So it would be like saying the rooms in the hotel are small, so the hotel is small, but that's not necessarily true. The cells in my body are invisible to the naked eye, so therefore me, the thing that's formed from all the cells, is invisible to the naked eye. That does not follow. How about this one's in the book, so I can use that. Sodium and chloride are two individual elements that are highly unstable. So that means that sodium chloride, the combination of the two, is highly unstable. But no, it isn't. NaCl, which is a sort of scientific name for sodium chloride, is just table salt, really. And that's a staple of everyone's diet. So the two elements that form together to create salt are highly unstable and dangerous in isolation. But in combination, they are just NaCl salt. And I guess, you know, like, you could have cases of stereotyping where we form a stereotype based on associations that we've drawn from just one person or a couple people. You know, my friend is lazy, and he's a college student, so all college students are lazy. That would just be an erroneous inference from the part to the whole. So it's just not always true that features seen within individual members of sets of groups exhibit the same properties or qualities that the whole group does. And that's all that this example of a fallacy is showing us. So let me close with a couple last words. There's another homework assignment that's coming forward that's due in a week, and I'm going to mail off to you guys the directions for how to complete it after class. But if you want to wait until after the Tuesday lecture to complete that homework, then that's probably the best, because it has to do with the group of fallacies that we're going to learn on the next meeting. So fallacies of relevance, that's the next lecture topic. And the homework number 2 is just about those 8 fallacies within that category. So, I mean, if you wanted to, you could start trying to think about, or maybe even attempt some of the problems, which I'll send in a notification after class. But it's probably best to hold off until Tuesday. Now, that doesn't provide you with like a whole week to work on it, because it will be due on Thursday. I want to keep us on schedule. But it's not like the most difficult homework to at least fill in. You just have to write the name of the fallacy that is associated with the question. And just, I guess, if you want, like, I'll send this message to back this up, but if you want to look at it in your books, it's this. It's page 151 and 2. It's exercise 5-3, and it's just letters A through Z. And what that will tell you when you look in the book is identify the fallacy of relevance that occurs in each passage. So there's 26 lettered exercises, and all you got to do is write the name of the fallacy that's in the passage. The name is going to be one of the 8 fallacies of relevance, or in just a couple cases, there's no fallacy at all. And if that's the case, then the answer is no fallacy. So there's really 9 optional responses, one of which is correct for each of the 26 problems. The name of one of the 8 fallacies of relevance, or the words no fallacy. So that's what it is. It's exercise 5-3, page 151 and 2, problems A through Z, and you just have to name the fallacy of relevance that occurs. But I I would expect that probably you might feel a little more confident trying your hand at that after we learn about those fallacies on Tuesday. So hold off and just have a good weekend for the moment, and I'll be in touch with you over the weekend. And I'm working on finishing those midterms, and they'll be done pretty soon. Okay, so are we all good then? You guys good to go? If so, thanks again for coming through, and I guess I'll just see you guys back then after the weekend, and I'll be in touch. Okay, take it easy, guys. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.